Well, we're live.
Oh.
Do you want to take us in or shall I?
I guess.
Welcome back to the My RD Journey podcast. My name is Adam, your producer. In-house with me, of course, is the star of the show, Felicia Peraza of Peraza Nutrition, perazanutrition.com, here with another edition of the My RD Journey podcast.
Yes.
Do you want to tell everybody about the letters after your name? Or do we save that for when they read stuff? She has a whole encyclopedia of
I feel like we actually haven't gone over this, maybe.
Have we not?
I don't know.
You have your master's. That's some letters.
Yes.
You have your RD. That's some letters. I wonder if that picked up. It's like a motorcycle outside. You have your personal trainer cert. That's some more letters.
Yes.
And I probably missed something. Anyway, what are we talking about today?
So this is the second part of the TTM, the Transtheoretical Model.
Transtheoretical Model.
Yeah.
And do we want to talk about what that is? Just a little rehash. This is episode 2 of a 3-part series for the Transtheoretical Model, the stages of change.
Yes. So this is the stages of change. And basically, this is a model that explains how people change their behaviors over time. So actually, between the first podcast and this one, I was looking up different research, which we'll put into the description.
Show notes.
Yes.
Description.
But this can be applied to, stopping smoking, exercising, physical activity as a whole, but also in office, outside, and then nutrition and wellness and health behaviors. So the first episode we talked about, or the second episode in the My RD Journey podcast, we talked about the first 2 stages.
So that's a bit confusing what you just said there. So it was the second podcast we've done as a My RD Journey. So there's another episode about careers in dietetics, which I'll link here in a card if you're watching on YouTube. Also a link in the show notes if you're listening. And our next episode beyond that was part 1 of a 3-part series, but it was episode 2 of the podcast.
Yes.
Just to clarify, all relevant links will be in the description or the show notes.
Yes. So we've talked about the first 2 stages of the Transtheoretical Model, or the stages of change. So first 2 stages were the pre-contemplation and the contemplation. And then today we're going to be talking about preparation and action. And then our next part of the series, which will be the final part, is going to focus on the maintenance aspect and termination, which is kind of like a 6th stage that some people recognize and some don't. So
do you recognize that stage, or
I do. Sometimes people just lump together termination and maintenance, but I think they are separate. So we'll talk about them separately.
Okay. So that's exciting. So do we want to just or do you want to do a quick recap of the first 2 stages, what they are, just a quick 30 seconds elevator pitch?
Yeah. So the pre-contemplation is when people are not ready to change, or they're not aware that they need to make a change, so they are not thinking about it. And if you think about that in the time frame, they're not thinking about making any change in the next 6 months. And then the contemplation is that someone's thinking about it, but they're ambivalent. So that was the pros and cons are kind of equal, and that was a really big thing that we talked about, was that they're kind of on the fence about change.
They are a fence sitter. They are a moderate. Yes. Weird times we're in. The election is upon us.
Oh, that's
a moderate being someone who's not left or right, a fence sitter. It's a term used for describing people's political opinion. Yeah, whatever. It's it remains to be seen. The state of the world this week will probably radically change. Regardless of the outcome, whatever. We're not here to talk about politics. We're talking about the Transtheoretical Model. So that was a quick recap of the first 2 stages. The second 2 stages, stage 3 and stage 4, being preparation and action. And you did mention that a lot of your clients are in one of these 2 stages when you happen upon them, or when they find you. Yeah.
So these are actually the 2 stages that you're primarily, if you're seeing clients right now, you're going to primarily see clients in these stages, especially if you're outpatient. So, when I say you're primarily going to see these clients, it's, more so in an outpatient setting where
when
private
you say
practice.
Outpatient, is that exclusively private practice as outpatient? Because I've heard that term used if you work in a hospital as well.
Yeah. So it can also apply to, outpatient.
Clinical, I guess, is the term.
Yeah. And kind of if you think about, and if you're in an inpatient setting, I mentioned last podcast that, sometimes you're just kind of seeing a client because you get a referral, and so you have to go see them in their hospital bed. And so people may not be even thinking about a change at that point, or connecting what they're doing to, their nutrition and what they're eating. So they're kind of not really sure. They don't know. They're not aware.
So they are in what stage of the Transtheoretical Model?
Pre-contemplation.
Okay.
Generally. But generally, outpatient, if someone is kind of seeking out your services, they generally will probably be in that preparation stage and the action stage, which is what we're going to get into.
Cool.
So in the preparation stage, which is stage 3, people are ready to make the change. So they might be saying things like, I will do this. That's kind of like a key thing. So they're not necessarily actively doing it right now, but they are saying like, I will. And kind of a highlight here is that they're ready to make a change within like a month. So within 30 days, they're ready to get going. So they're kind of preparing.
So the preparation stage, so you just put a time constraint on it. Something we talked about last time is not using time constraints for a lot of these stages, but you're attaching a time constraint to this stage.
Yes.
Why is that?
So this is generally one where people kind of make a change within 30 days. And it's not to say that everyone will change in 30 days, but they're at the point where they are over the fence. Their pros are increasing, their cons are decreasing about whatever change they're going to make, and they generally do make a change within 30 days. Otherwise, they're probably not in the preparation stage. But if you had to put a time frame on it, and it's not to say if someone gets to, day 31 that they're no longer in preparation.
It's a loosely placed time constraint. Well, there is a certain number of weeks usually associated with creating or changing a habit. It's like 21 or 28 days or something.
Yeah.
So and you're just rounding up to 30, I guess, for that.
Kind of. So it's, and actually I have that as something to kind of highlight in the maintenance stage, because it does actually take longer than 21 days to create a habit. And when you kind of look for that, no one really knows where that comes from, but it takes a lot longer to kind of.
It's a folk tale.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that actually in the last part of it.
I stand corrected. It in fact takes longer than 21 days to create a habit, longer than 28 days, I guess.
Yeah.
I assume that's associated with the first few weeks being harder of a change.
Yeah.
Before a habit is formed, but after it's become a part of your ritual. I guess there's an intermediate stage where habits aren't quite formed neurologically, but physically you're getting used to doing something differently. So it's sort of a middling period, I guess.
Yeah. And you kind of think about, and why it's so vastly different too, is it depends on the person, how long they've been doing something for, what kind of attachment they might have to a certain habit. But then if you also think about, the temptations too, like those kinds of things, those kind of temptations to go back to old ways, generally that can continue up to like 2 years. So, but
that's a lot longer than I thought it would be. 2 years.
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Actually, one of the studies I was reading, which
we can link it if we have we can link it next time, I guess, if we get into that more in depth. I don't think we were planning to go down that road.
No, yeah, because most people aren't necessarily in that habit forming stage just yet. They're kind of building it at this point. But
okay, so do we want to dive a little deeper into preparation, exactly what it is, what are the stages, or what are the characteristics of this particular stage? Like, what are people saying in this stage? What are people doing? What do you want them to do? Yeah.
So people at this stage, again, I mentioned the I will. So that's like a huge indicator where they are in this stages of change. So the I will start exercising. I will eat more vegetables. Or they might have taken small steps. So like I found a gym I can go to, or I found an exercise class. And so they're kind of thinking and planning. So that's kind of a key part of this preparation, is they're making the plans and they're taking these small little action steps to kind of put things in motion.
They're gearing up for action, it sounds like.
Yes.
They're getting ready to act.
And a lot of times when I have people come to me in this stage, they'll say, I know I have to do it and I'm ready to do it, but I don't really know what to do. Like, what should I do? And so that's why they often come and see me, because they're like, losing weight is kind of the big one, or I know I need to get my blood sugar under control, but I'm not really sure how to go about doing it. So they acknowledge that there's a problem. They're ready to make some changes, but they're not really sure what those to be.
So that's a key distinction between contemplation and preparation, is when they're actively acknowledging, okay, I have this issue. It needs to be addressed. I am ready to make that change. I know that I need to make a change to correct an issue.
Yeah.
Something like that. They're affirming positively that there is a thing to be corrected. That seems like a very key distinction between preparation and contemplation.
Yeah.
You want them to actively acknowledging what their issue is in preparation.
Exactly.
So they're saying a lot of I will, I'm going to, and finding things that they can incorporate into their lives. Like when you said that someone would find a gym or they're experimenting with foods or something.
Yeah. So any kind of like taking small steps. So sometimes, the gym is kind of like, they find a gym, they find a class, or they find a YouTube channel that they enjoy, but they might be also identifying some recipes that they might incorporate, or thinking about different vegetables they could put on their shopping list. And they're just in this like preparing to, so if maybe their goal, and that's kind of a highlight of the stage 2, is starting to set goals to put into action, which would be the next stage. But they would be planning these goals and then saying, okay, how am I going to get there?
What's the most common thing in your experience when you get a client, you're trying to gauge where they are, and you discover that they're in preparation? What's the most common thing that sets that off for you? Like, what's the most common thing you hear said that tells you, okay, this person's in preparation?
Usually it's the, I know I need to do this, I just don't know what to do. Or it's like, tell me what to do, which normally I don't just tell people what to do anyway, but that's usually like the first thing out of their mouth is like, my doctor told me this, and I know I need to do this, and I'm ready to do this. I don't really know where to start, or I don't know how to get this going.
Okay, so they're actively and openly inviting your recommendation, and they are willingly and openly acknowledging a change needs to be made, and they're seeking guidance.
Yes. And
actively seeking guidance for change.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's kind of a highlight too, is, like they're looking for that guidance. And a lot of people in that preparation stage will say to me that they've tried different things in the past and they may or may not have worked. And now they're coming to me and they're like, okay, I've tried this and this, and now I want this to work long term. So that's another thing I might hear from people, is that they're like, I've tried to lose weight in the past, or I've tried to control my blood sugars, but now I'm here, and they might have had a slew of things that have happened over the last couple of years, and now they're like, okay, what's something I can do long term? So they're ready, and they're like, I'm ready for this like lifestyle change. So lay it on me, kind of thing. So
what happens? You get the client, they're in preparation. Mm-hmm. They signal to you that they are willing to receive whatever guidance. What's been your experience from there with that client? What do you then do? What do you take them through? And what does the path look like to get from preparation to action?
Yeah. So the first thing is to identify what the goal might be, and making it a SMART goal, which I don't know if we talked about SMART goals on this before.
What's a SMART goal? What's a stupid goal?
So the SMART, there really are no stupid goals, but the SMART goal would be, specific, measurable, attainable or achievable, realistic, and then time bound.
How do you define realistic?
So realistic for them. So if you think about like losing 10 pounds in a week, might not be realistic.
Who's that realistic for?
Well,
anybody? 10 pounds in a week?
Well, it's a lot of those fad diets, actually.
We just drop a bunch of water weight? I don't know.
Pretty much. Or like realistic as in how much can someone change at once? So often I get a lot of clients who are like, I'm going to do this, 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 and this. And they're like really excited, which can be a really good thing. But sometimes it can set them up for, kind of not hitting all the points, and then they get discouraged. But really they just like threw way too much on themselves at once. So with the SMART goal in particular, we identify it being specific. So when we think about healthy eating, people will say, I want to eat better. I'm like, okay, well, what does that look like? What specifically does that look like? Does that mean eating more vegetables at dinner? Does that mean, exercising? And then we start to define that more. So
that's a SMART goal. It's relative depending on where the person is at that point.
Yeah. And so like for exercise in particular, and this is a key thing to do in this preparation stage, is define what the goal is going to be. And so let's say if it's exercise, it might be that they want to, if they're starting from no exercise, we might say, okay, well, what's realistic to start with? Or what do you think would be achievable for you? And so
running a marathon tomorrow.
And so some people might say, I think I'll start off with 1 day per week or 2 days a week. And then from that, we might kind of break it down even more to say, okay, what time of day? And so I'll often get clients who say like, well, I'm not a morning person. And then I'm like, well, okay, so what time of day would be good? And I'm like, well, maybe on my lunch break. And so we might say, okay, 2 days a week at lunch break. And then we'll define, okay, what's the time frame on that? So is it 20 minutes? Is it 30 minutes? And
so
that kind of thing.
A really specific goal
makes
a goal SMART, I guess.
Yeah. And
more specific.
And when you think about it, you want it to be something that someone can track and measure. So, that way they know if they've achieved it, So if they say, I'm going to exercise for 20 minutes, 2 days a week, they can look back and say, I exercised for 2 days this week on Tuesday and Thursday, and it was 20 minutes. And they know exactly that they've accomplished it.
Yeah, I could see your goals being easier to hit and maintain if they aren't overly complicated too.
Yeah.
Because if it's harder to track mentally and you have to physically track it, either like a written thing or through an app, you're just giving yourself more things to forget to do. But if you can just recall simply, Tuesday, Thursday, I exercise 20 minutes, boom, done.
And depending on the person, like I have some clients who, when we start to do goal setting, they like to get really, really specific, like to say exactly what they're going to do on Tuesday and exactly what they're going to do on Thursday. Like Tuesday, they're going to go for a walk, and Thursday, they're going to do this specific workout. And I have other clients who like to leave it more open so they could be flexible, and they'll say, Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm going to just kind of leave it up to cardio or whatever I feel like doing, so they have the goal set of here's what I'm going to do, but they're just like leaving it more open.
Is that worse or better? Does it matter?
Not necessarily. It depends on the client. And that's where it's my role to check in with them and see what's working and what feels the best for them, because they know themselves best. And that's kind of the whole thing with this TTM.
Yeah, well, that's kind of our pattern here.
Yeah, like you're partnering with them and you're helping them unlock what'll work. So I can't tell them like that's not going to work for you.
Right.
They know
we're talking about goals here. And that's one thing you do in the preparation stage is you help the client set smart goals. Mm-hmm. And setting smart goals is one of the things that helps move the client from preparation into action.
Yes.
What are some other things that we do to help the client move from preparation into action? Like I'm a dietitian. What do you do?
Setting a start date actually can be really helpful. So sometimes people kind of spend...
That's also a time constraint.
It is, but sometimes people spend so much time preparing, and this is where it kind of depends on the person. I've had so many clients where they prepare and they prepare and they prepare and they don't actually take action, and they get themselves so overwhelmed and like that everything needs to be perfect that they don't actually do anything.
So in the business world, this is known as planning and execution.
Okay.
So it's the same thing where people get stuck in the planning stage for months or years when they're planning to launch a product or service or start a service within their company. That planning stage can stretch infinitely, and you get caught in this. It's a trap. Mm-hmm. Because you think you want more information, you don't have the exact thing you need, and you make all these excuses. It's really easy to fall into that planning trap where you never pull the trigger and actually execute the thing. It's often better to start a little sooner than you think you should, because once you get going, you'll build momentum, you'll correct course from there. But if you decide to wait, you can wait forever. Mm-hmm. So this sounds very similar to that. That's a business thing they talk about with like management and like leadership and stuff like that, where like it's funny. It's very analogous, planning and execution versus preparation and action. So yeah, I could see the preparation stage being something that you kind of have to help people into and through, but also kind of push them out of.
Yeah.
Where a time constraint could then I see be really valuable.
Yeah.
So an appropriate use of time constraints is fortunately not like. I was just a little surprised because before in pre-contemplation and contemplation, it seemed like a time constraint was a bad thing. Mm-hmm. And now that I'm seeing the parallels here between like something a lot of businesses do and a lot of consulting companies when they come in, kind of, you're consulting. You're in a way someone's consultant for what they eat.
Yeah.
So it's very analogous in that regard.
Yeah. And it's funny because now that you kind of brought it to business, if anyone listening or watching this is a dietitian looking to go into private practice, that's kind of the biggest thing is sometimes
pull the trigger.
Yeah. People get stuck in the planning phase. And even I did that too, where it's kind of spent extra time in the planning phase before even, launching the practice itself, when it's like, just do it,
Yeah, I come across a lot of people that are thinking about starting a YouTube channel or a podcast or something like that, and I'm practically kicking them off the cliff. I'm like I'm throwing them into the water, like just swim, go,
just do it.
Well, yeah, you have to start.
Yeah,
you have to get started. It's so much better to just start with incomplete information and then just correct course from there. Because what's the worst that can happen? what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
You fumble a little bit and then you figure it out from there. Mm-hmm. You could stay in preparation or planning or whatever you want to call it for literally years.
Yeah.
And then, then what? 5 years later, you still haven't started.
Exactly. And that's where, when a lot of people go to see a dietitian and, you're working with people, it's, being able to kind of provide them with that support to say, like, it's okay to just get started, but also helping them as they kind of move from preparation into action to say, that everything they're doing is moving them forward. So even if they feel like they haven't reached a goal yet, it's still moving them forward versus where they were just thinking about it.
Yeah. So if you start something, if you act and you discover that you were ill prepared, you've probably made much more progress than if you were just still preparing. Mm-hmm. Because at least you've tried and you've done something. And if you've tried and failed, you've made more progress than not trying at all.
Exactly.
That seems deceptive, but the net gain, even though it's a failure, it's still a net positive. One thing I could easily draw this to is someone trying to stay sober, and they decide to start, sobriety, a period of sobriety, and then they lapse, and then they're a failure. But like, how many days did you go without with being sober?
Yeah.
Compared to prior to that, where you just wanted to try it? A temporary lapse or a failure in action does not mean you should have stayed in preparation for longer.
Yeah.
It's better to start and try and build the skills and get used to action rather than convincing yourself. It's creative avoidance is one of the terms used a lot.
I heard that.
Yeah, it's where you're giving yourself more reasons to not act because if you're doing something right now, if you're in a stage of life or doing things, it's easier to just maintain that than it is to actually change.
Yeah.
And this, in essence, is a change.
Yeah. And it's, you brought up a good point with...
Thanks.
that made me think of, with the idea of like failure and all that is, I always ask clients, one, I usually try to reframe it as like learning opportunities. But I always ask people, well, what did you learn from it? So if something went totally off the rails for them, I'm like, well, what did you learn from the experience? And, sometimes it means more planning, more things to have ready for themselves on hand in terms of like maybe having more snacks available or maybe like, not planning their workout at 6 a.m. because it's unrealistic for them to get up at 5.
Yeah. Failing is not a waste of time.
No.
You learn and you get better.
Exactly.
So trying to act and failing is better than infinitely preparing.
Yeah. And a lot of people are afraid of failing, which is why they can kind of get stuck in this stage. And why
it's an ego hit.
Yeah. And why it's good to have, I keep saying the dietitian, but it's good to just have support overall, whether it's the dietitian as being one, but also, their family, their friends, people that can be like, hey, it's okay, or just to kind of pick them up a little bit too when they're in this kind of getting ready and maybe taking some of those smaller steps.
Okay, so one of the things we talked about in terms of helping a client get into action, move into action, was to set a goal and then also to set a time constraint, I guess, for that goal. Is there anything else that you use to try to move people into action from preparation?
Yeah, so the goal, setting a start date, which sometimes if I'm talking with people, sometimes it tends to be like the following week. Usually it's not, 30 days out like we mentioned. But sometimes that goal can be like, okay, I'm going to start exercising. That's my goal. I will, so they're in the preparation, I will, but they're not ready to say, I'm going to start next week. They need to gather the resources. So that's where that 30 days kind of time frame comes in. They gather information, you help them gather information, and then maybe they're ready to set the goal, set the date, and, then move into that action stage. But a key thing here is identifying any kind of barriers or obstacles. So a lot of times when I work with clients, they've already tried making changes and they may have, gone back to their old habits. And so one key thing is identifying what stands in their way. So what kind of barriers stand in their way? And then asking them what's worked in the past to kind of, work through that barrier. So that's a huge part of this kind of preparation stage, is not just setting the goal, but identifying what can get in their way while they're putting this into action.
So there's a lot of value to identifying the obstacles because they're going to face them anyway. Mm-hmm. And if you identify them in advance, those obstacles become something known versus, the great unknown, or they're more scary. When you put these obstacles front and center and identify them, I think that helps to make them less intimidating.
Yeah, and it also increases their confidence level, and willpower is something that gets thrown around a lot, but being able to identify what has worked in the past, identify they're not these big scary unknowns, but to say, here are some things that I can do instead. It increases confidence. It increases I can do this attitude, which all kind of helps keeping people motivated and going. So
okay, so we've got a client in preparation. We identify goals. We set a time constraint. We identify obstacles to prepare them to face them. We build their confidence, and we bolster them with motivation and support. Then we're moving into action.
Yes.
Okay. What are the characteristics of action? What do you look for? I'm interested mostly to know how you know someone has actually transitioned into action. Like, what is the telltale sign that says, I'm in action now?
Yeah. So it's the I am stage, which is I am exercising. I am exercising 3 days a week. I am eating more vegetables, and they're actively doing it. And they're building it up week by week. So it might have started, let's say week 1 action, that they are eating more, let's say like a cup of broccoli at dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'm not using Tuesday, Thursday. And so they're I am eating more vegetables. And so at this stage, they might be building it up. So they might say, I'm eating vegetables 2 days a week, and now they want to bump it up to 3. And so they're kind of building upon, and they're actively doing these things. Same thing with exercise too. They might have started walking for 10 minutes 3 days a week, and now they're kind of actively adding to that. Or some people keep the same goal, so they want to exercise for 3 days a week, 10 minutes, and they might do that for 2 or 3 weeks until they're ready to move into adding more time or adding in a different exercise or whatever it is, but they are actively doing it.
So we are in action when there is action being taken.
Yes.
That's pretty simple. I am is the moniker of speech. So I like that. I really wasn't researched on TTM before we started doing these podcasts. So I'm kind of learning about it as you are as well. So what I like about this is that there is a very clear identifying phrase for each stage. Can we quickly recap? And this is what I do here. I just throw these curveballs. We're not prepared for this. I'm testing your knowledge on the spot. What's the phrase for pre-contemplation?
I can't or I won't.
Okay. And then contemplation?
I may.
And then preparation?
Preparation is I will.
So we're at pop quiz. We're at action, which is...
I am.
Okay. So yeah, and these are very clearly defined things that people say in their speech all the time. You're not going to have to fish for these lines. It's just going to come out during conversation. Very easy to pick up. I am more and more impressed with this Transtheoretical model as I learn more about it. You will undoubtedly discover people using these telltale lines in their speech, no matter what you're talking about, in any stage of change for anything. So this is a really good model for what you do. It applies really well.
Yeah.
Very impressive.
Yeah. And at this stage, people are actively doing it. They're in the I am, they're, doing the thing where you can...
They're doing the thing.
That's probably...
They're doing the thing.
That's,
You just did that.
I did. Oh, well.
No one can see that if they're listening. So she held her hands up above her head in confusion, looking at the ceiling.
Isn't there an emoji? No, okay. There's an emoji that does that. I use that a lot.
Pepe hands.
Is that what it's called?
I don't know.
Oh, anyway. A dietitian can be really helpful in this stage because you mentioned lapses and the idea of a relapse.
I did. Completely unrehearsed. Amazing.
And that's actually something.
Is that part of this stage?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, where people they're doing it, things are going well, they're exercising 3 days a week, and then
they're
stress.
doing the thing, and then something happens.
Yeah, stress happens, the holidays, literally anything.
Holidays are coming.
It is, that's right.
Tis the season.
Oh, yes.
It's November.
It is November.
Insane.
And so...
It was summer last week.
It was.
I swear.
That is true. People can get discouraged in this stage where they feel like everything's going well. They're really excited about the changes they're making. They're seeing progress. And then all of a sudden something throws them for a loop and they're like, not again. and then they start to get discouraged with themselves. And so this is where, one, having support, but also having, the dietitian there to, help everybody kind of take a step back, and this is kind of what I do with clients in this stage. They're doing things, everything's going well. And then we take a step back to say, okay, well, one, what threw you off track? And sometimes it's stress, which is kind of a highlight of things happening right now. And then sometimes it's, they had a change in their career or their job, a family member, anything like that. And so we take a step back and say, okay, well, what do you think would be realistic moving forward? And sometimes you have to, reformat the goals, because the goal they set a month ago might not be the same goal that applies right now. And sometimes we have to kind of bring it back a little bit, or switch things up, so often, like with food in particular, I'll have clients who are eating really well. Maybe they're doing like salads, for lunch, and they're cutting up their veggies. And then all of a sudden, something changes where they're watching grandchildren. They're like, how am I supposed to prep all my food and, have everything ready to go? And then that's where we might brainstorm and say, okay, what, maybe they might get more frozen stuff. And it's just kind of helping to identify the barrier and creating a solution that'll work for them in that moment. But you're kind of tweaking. So they're not backtracking stages here. It's just they're in the action stage. They want to keep it going. It's just, what does that look like now?
So they may have to change their behaviors or their habits to roll with resistance to their plan, essentially. Mm-hmm. Yeah, life, happens. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it hands you lemons. You got to make lemonade, right? I was about to get real weird and preachy there for a second, but
so I wonder where that was going.
I'll pull it back. So what's interesting is, and this kind of speaks to, I'm assuming anyone who's listening to this, well, may be a prospective dietitian, but also may just be a person. Either way, what this comes down to is you are helping someone through something that you have seen other people through and helped with before. Mm-hmm. These people are relying on you for an expertise to know what they're going through and know how to help them through it. It's kind of a distinction where it's like, there are a lot of roles like this, mm-hmm. where the value may not be crystal clear to the person who's in the position of receiving the guidance or the help, but you having been through this with dozens or hundreds of people before has a lot of value. It's a lot like a manager with a team of employees, or like a general on the battlefield with a bunch of soldiers. Mm-hmm. You're leading people. You have an expertise, you have a skill set where you, as the dietitian, you know what they need to do next. You have to help them get to that thing. They don't know that you know that, and they don't know what they're doing. Like these clients, they don't know what they're going through. They're going through paces and you're guiding them through it, but they can't see the big picture the way you can, mm-hmm. as the dietitian. They're not overtly aware of these stages of change. They're not overtly aware of what they're doing and how it's really affecting their body or their lifestyle or how they're creating habits. You're the expert here. So you have to help them through these things. That's where your value comes in. Mm-hmm. And this model and these stages of change really speak to just how necessary a dietitian is. There's a lot to manage here. Mm-hmm. So the skill set and the expertise is extremely valuable, whether or not the client or society as a whole seems to see it that way. Now, you're helping people through these stages, and you're helping them manage changes in their lives, and you being the expert, the dietitian, you've seen this before. Mm-hmm. You know what they can expect. You know what they should do and how they should do it. But you have to kind of code it in a way that helps them pick it up better. So this is not something that we talked about talking about, but like how do you have to be as delicate with that in this stage as you were in pre-contemplation and contemplation, where it was more about like gently leading versus, all right, do this, this, and that?
Yeah, so there's still the idea of partnership that you always want to keep. And, at any stage, if you tell someone what to do, especially unsolicited, you can provoke resistance. So they'll, want to do the opposite often. But this doesn't necessarily mean that you can't give expertise and give insight. So an example here is I have a lot of clients who will be actively doing something. They find that they, kind of have a misstep or a mishap, and they're like, what should I be doing? Or what should I do? And so one thing is to never really use your own experience. Like, well, I do this, because it puts you on a pedestal sometimes. And then people feel like they have to hit this like golden thing. So what I usually frame it as, which is not a lie because I always have a lot of clients in these stages, is I'll say, well, here's what my other clients have tried. And you give them a menu of options. And I'm not sure if we mentioned this before, but you don't want to give too many options because it could be overwhelming. Usually like 3 or 4 tends to be kind of like a good sweet spot.
More than 2.
Yeah.
But not 15.
Yep. So I'll give them a menu of options and say, does anything stand out to you, or are you thinking something else? Because sometimes as you're talking through, people think of something. But if you leave it as like you have to choose from these 3, they feel like they're stuck and they almost want to please you. Oh, well, the dietitian told me I should do this, but you're still leaving them in this, they're the expert in their own lives. So you're giving them information. Here's some ideas of what my other clients have tried. And then you give them options. You say, anything stand out to you that might be helpful, or did you think of something else?
Yeah. The more I hear about this stuff, the more it reminds me of management, where you have a team of employees and you're trying to guide them to the right thing, but you know what the thing is. Mm-hmm. So, but you need them to be able to make the decision on their own. It's much more powerful that way. That never stops applying to all of these stages of change. So we talked last time, when we talked about the first 2 stages, one of the things that we went through that I think is probably valuable for anyone who's, looking to get into dietetics or is working with clients, we talked about specifics. So we talked about lines, things people would say, things you would say to a client in stages like the pre-contemplation and contemplation. We talked about like what you would say. Yeah. Literally what you would say. And I think we drew upon some specific client cases. Mm-hmm. Are you able to provide us with any of that? I hate to backtrack too much, but in preparation, what kind of things would you say to the clients to help them come to their own thing? And, you're leading the horse to water, I guess. What would you say? So let's say we have a client, and I've had a lot of clients that say this is, I want to start exercising. I'm not sure how or what to do. So if they're in the preparation stage, they haven't started exercising, they want to do it, they're ready to, but they're not really sure how. And that's where they're coming to me, kind of sometimes as the personal trainer instead. But so they'll say that. And so I'll say to them, okay, so what were you thinking about with exercise? And so sometimes they'll jump into it and say, well, here's what I did before. And if not, what I'll say to them is, what have you tried in the past? What has worked well in the past? And you draw upon their experience. And then from that, I'll say to them, okay, what were you thinking in terms of what might be realistic to maybe start with? How have you thought about maybe how many days you might want to start with? And this is where it depends on the client. So I sometimes have clients where they're ready to start planning, they're ready to do all these things and then like really jump into action. And I have some people who are like, I don't know, you tell me, like, what should I start with? I don't know. I don't normally exercise and I'm ready to do this. And then that's where I'll say, would it be okay if I shared some information about exercise with you and some ideas of what other clients have tried? And then you can let me know what you think might work best. And so for some clients, I might talk about, different body weight exercises they could do, or I might share with them some resources and let them decide. So that's where this kind of resource aspect comes in. And this is preparation. Yeah. So they're ready, but they're not sure how. And so I give them some information, allow them to kind of take time to digest it. And then we schedule a session for maybe like a week later. And it depends on the client, but sometimes it'll be a week where they take time to digest all the information we just talked about and think about what'll work for them. And then that's where we get into the action kind of aspect in terms of setting the goal itself. And then that moves them closer to action. And these, it's not like all of a sudden it's just like a turnover point. It's kind of like when you go from preparation to action, it's very like, I don't know, blended. It's fluid. I was trying to think of the right word. Yeah, no, you blend into it. It's not a hard stop and then a start. Yeah. So, but usually, it's gathering the information, and really identifying what's going to work for them and taking that step. And that's, I mentioned taking steps, but that's kind of like a really classic sign of moving the preparation to action is they start seeing what'll maybe work. And sometimes people will say, let's say I sent them information and then we haven't set a goal yet, and they'll come to me at the next session and they're like, oh, I started walking on Mondays at 10 o'clock, and they'll like have taken a step. Okay. And, it wasn't like a clearly defined goal that we had just yet, but they took a step. Yeah. And so that's where I might say, well, that's awesome. Like,
how did you feel about that? Or, and sometimes people are just start building their goals right there. And it's not really much in terms of prompting from me. It's just, I gave them some information that they were looking for, and they kind of like took it and went with it. So that's where it's kind of like just all of a sudden blend.
Okay. Yeah. So then as we're blending into action, so that was everything that you would say, some specifics on preparation.
Yes.
Can you give us some examples for action, specific cases maybe that you can recall, something prominent in your mind, things that you would say, like literally things that you would say to a person in action, or maybe an example of some dialogue?
Yeah. So if someone's in action, usually if they're actively exercising, let's just say, sometimes they don't necessarily need me to talk to them more about exercise, but sometimes if people are exercising 3 days a week, they're like, I'm kind of getting bored with what I'm doing and I want to bump it up. What would you suggest? And that's where I could give them some ideas. Or bring it back to nutrition. Someone might say, I've been eating more vegetables, but I'm thinking of adding in more fruit now. And so they're kind of action planning with health as a whole, and they've added in vegetables, they want to add in fruit, and they're wondering what the best kind of way to go about that. So they're in this active action stage, and then that's where I'm kind of helping them kind of set the goals. I will say with action, a lot of times where I come in is with the reframing aspect and like helping people troubleshoot and with barriers. So what that usually looks like is often I have people jump into action, they're ready to go, and then all of a sudden they're like, it rained on Tuesday and I couldn't go for my walk, and then I just, then I got caught up with work, and then it's like all of these things happen. And they're like, I feel really disappointed. I know I said I was going to exercise 3 days and it's just, and we take a step back. And so I might say to them, okay, well, what did you learn from that? What do you think might be helpful moving forward? And sometimes it's getting resources for indoor exercises they could do.
Yeah, I was going to say that's an easy fix. Just like walk around in your house or something.
Yeah. Or sometimes people, like I have a lot of people where they're, at home now with more people because of, working at home. And so they're like, sometimes it's hard to, figure out.
A lot of people are working from home right now? That's so weird. How come?
Thou shall not be named.
I don't think we don't need to talk about it.
But, sometimes people are like, it's really hard to exercise because this person is telling me to do this. And sometimes it's putting themselves first. So that's sometimes an action stage is telling them that, this is a priority that you've identified. How do you put yourself first?
If you want to help others, you have to help yourself first.
No, but that's really...
Well, it's like if the plane's going down, put your mask on
That's
first.
Exactly, yeah.
That's kind of how it goes. But this is sort of a more macro thing with the rest of your life.
Yeah. And that's honestly where a lot of my clients struggle when they fall off track. It's because they put other people first. And it's really hard to, take the time for themselves. But when I have clients that realize that and they're like, I know that eating well gives me more energy and then sets a better example for my kids. And this is a priority. So when I'm stressed and I don't plan and I don't have the healthy food on hand, then everything else kind of falls away. And so they identify, and that's where the conversation comes in the action stage. When you ask the questions, what worked well? What do you think, you might do for next time? And you ask them, they know, but you asking the questions helps them move forward in action.
Okay. That's a lot of stuff there. So that was what you'd be looking for in terms of specifics.
Yeah.
In action. No, that makes a lot of sense. So we talked about time constraints a little bit. And I assume you have a time constraint. Well, first, I think I'm getting a little too far ahead. So you generally want to measure stuff as you're doing this.
Yes.
So you one thing that can help someone stay motivated is tracking and measuring progress.
Yes, absolutely.
I assume you have methods for that?
Yeah, it depends on the client. So sometimes it depends. With exercise, I have clients who like check off a calendar or like put it in their calendar that they exercised, or they use apps for tracking their workouts, and so they can kind of see over time. With food, tracking food sometimes it really depends on the client, because sometimes that can actually derail goals, where people kind of hyper focus on calories and not food quality. So usually I like people to track specifics, like what their goal is. So if their goal is to add more vegetables at dinner, track that specific thing. But it really depends on the client. I don't suggest tracking weight, but the habits, because people focus too much on the weight and not what they're doing in the moment.
Yeah, weight's not really a good measurement for a lot of things. It's, I mean, if you fluctuate a few pounds, it doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah, and you fluctuate throughout the day and throughout the week, so tracking the habits is a way better, approach to it, because that's what's going to change weight over time too anyway. Is that what you're doing?
Your health can be positively impacted without much of a noticeable change in your weight too. I mean, your blood pressure can go down, your resting heart rate can go down. You can develop better lung capacity. You can get more muscular density and stronger bones without your weight being impacted. There's a lot of things that can change in a positive way that your weight wouldn't show.
Exactly.
And healthy eating in dietetics is going to be a good way of getting to those changes.
Exactly. And that's one of those things too, like with exercise, when I have clients that are starting with strength training, sometimes their weight doesn't change. And so what I have them do is track, beginning measurements. So in terms of how many push-ups they might be able to do, how many sit-ups, how long it takes them to walk a mile or whatever it is. And by the time they get to the end of whatever routine that I've designed for them, or, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever it is, we track those things again to see strength increases. And this is kind of more body weight at home, but
well, you're veering in the territory of personal trainer right now. This is my RD journey. Are you suggesting that RDs start looking into fitness as a thing that they do too, as a private practice? Or
so one thing to just, I guess,
bit of a tangent here.
So one way to kind of bring it back a little bit for a second is,
it's a good thing you apologize, because I would have been really offended if you hadn't.
Exercise is within the scope of practice for dietitians to talk about generally.
So interesting distinction.
Yeah.
So you as a dietitian do have grounds to speak about exercise in a general sense.
Yes. So you could talk about the CDC recommendations, what aerobic exercise is, what strength training is, how much is recommended per week, those kinds of things.
That's important to know.
Yeah. And part of it is because that all plays a role in, someone's energy needs and how you would work with them. The idea of setting up a workout plan that's specific and tailored, now that would be out of the scope for a dietitian generally, unless they have some other certification. So
you have your ACSM or ASCM or whatever it is.
Yeah, ACSM personal trainer, or there's a certified sports dietitian, and so there's levels of different credentials. So,
but if you don't have a credential as a personal trainer or any kind of physical fitness credential, you still have the ability to, within the scope of your practice, discuss general fitness advice.
Yes.
Which I think is a really smart thing to take advantage of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's where, when you talk to clients about, and again, before I was a personal trainer, I used to just recommend people saw a trainer to get started with, just so a lot of people were totally new to exercise and, before going to the gym and using machines. And so they're like, I don't even know where to start. But they might have started, usually I talk to people about starting with body weight stuff, going for a walk. You could talk to people about that kind of thing, or what they've tried in the past and what they'd be wanting to incorporate now. So some people like biking and all that. So
maybe we should do a podcast episode on what, as a dietitian, you could and should speak of in terms of fitness, what the scope of practice is as it relates to fitness specifically.
Yeah.
There's probably a lot there.
And I think the scope of practice, would be a good thing to just talk about in general.
Scope of practice.
Yeah,
which the fitness in there.
The fitness would be in it, because it's the Academy has a scope of practice document that's pretty long.
Upcoming episode.
But that's a really good point to make, because
thanks. Thank you.
A lot of people are kind of not sure.
I made that point.
And it is. No, and the thing with the scope of practice is it's actually kind of vague, and which is in a sense good, because it relies on what your expertise is, and there's different levels to it. So yeah, totally good topic to talk about.
Sweet. Yeah. We'll have to do that one after we finish this series.
Yeah. So kind of bringing it back, I guess, to food maybe.
We keep talking about fitness, and I just wanted to see if it was even within the scope of practice for a dietitian to talk about that. And I know you are a personal trainer, and for you, it's a thing that's, it's part of your business now.
Yeah.
But for other dietitians, I wasn't sure how much of a part of their business it could be. It's good to know that they have the ability to talk about fitness in a more general way, that it is within their scope of practice. That's valuable to know. I don't know if every dietitian would even really consider that.
Yeah, it's one of those things that in undergrad, it's kind of packaged in with everything we do in terms of talking about general exercise recommendations. And even in my nutrition class that I teach, we talk about exercise, but it's not in the sense that they're going to prescribe somebody a workout plan, but just knowing what the recommendations are, what the CDC says. And that's one thing that, if you find something on like the CDC website, they're a really good resource for exercise, but they have a lot of really great tips for people getting started too that you can always share with clients. So.
Okay, so we talked about, measuring progress and tracking things.
Yeah, and I think I just cut you off. But
well, it just made me think. You're the dietitian, so.
It just made me think, though, one of the reasons why tracking can be so helpful is to be able to have people look back on how much progress they've made so far. So if they do have like a lapse or, they're off track, as to what a lot of clients say, like I'm totally off track this week, and sometimes they can get really discouraged and really negative, being able to say, well, look at what you've accomplished so far. And so sometimes like I have a lot of people that like to track their intake or, save the recipes that they've made over time. And like, they'll just look through and be like, oh, wow, I've actually had, tried a lot of things, and so if they have a rut that they're in, being able to look back on what they've accomplished so far can be really empowering.
Yeah, of course, you wouldn't be able to do that if you weren't tracking it the whole time. So being able to look back and, not necessarily sit on your accomplishments, but to just look back and know that you have made progress, you have done things.
Mm-hmm.
That could, I could see that being an effective tool for motivating yourself to continue on.
Yeah. One thing in this stage too, as the dietitian, that's really important is to kind of not be a cheerleader necessarily, be overly like, yay, but to help clients celebrate, because sometimes people get so into what they're doing that they don't celebrate the progress they've made so far. So just kind of drawing a little bit of attention to that can be really helpful sometimes. So.
The cat does not care about what we're doing.
No, she just straight up left.
She was there the whole time last time on the chair next to you, which is why we have that chair there. Now it's just an empty chair. Like it's meant for a third person. She just jumped down, got a little drink, and walked into the other room. She does not care about this at all. No, she didn't. What do we think in terms of time frame here for action? How long do they stay in action? And do you have a certain amount of time in mind for them to transition into maintenance?
So usually, she's back. Usually it's like 6 months that people tend to be in this action stage where they're building up to a point where I don't want to use the term plateau, but they plateau with where they're at, in terms of they maintain, so people sometimes think of plateau as negative.
Yeah, I was going to say it has a negative connotation. But they're not necessarily plateauing, they're achieving.
Yeah. And so then that's when, we'll talk about maintenance next podcast, but when people get to the maintenance phase, they've hit a point where they are kind of at their peak, in terms of whether it's nutrition goal that they set, exercise goal, and they enter into maintenance. And then that's where at maintenance, then they decide, okay, do I want to change things up, set a new goal, do something different, or continue with what I'm doing and maintain it over time.
So you get the feeling, I guess, that a client is ready to transition into the maintenance stage, or rather that you treat them as though they're in the maintenance stage. It seems like there's not really a hard line between action and maintenance, and that it's really not a big deal to flip-flop between them. Because if someone's in the action stage, they're in the right place. Yeah,
exactly. And one thing too, and usually one of the ways that I can kind of tell how clients are doing is our appointments space out. So the action stage, the preparation and the action stage tends to be a little closer together. And then as soon as they kind of start to move into like, action to maintenance, again, everything's kind of really fluid. When they get to that point, they might start spacing out the appointments where they don't need me necessarily as much. And that's the whole goal, is they won't need me. And, that's kind of one way to tell, is that, clients are doing well and they're like, well, I'll see you in 2 months instead of 1, because they're feeling more confident. They're doing things, they're if they run into any kind of like slip ups or anything like that, they can address it themselves. And that's, the more you start to see the confidence increase and them troubleshooting kind of on their own, is more so where you start to see people moving into maintenance.
Yeah. There's one thing about this method that's nice too, is that it prevents you as the dietitian from kind of selfishly making someone dependent on you so that you have a client for life. You don't really want that, I would assume. That's not really the goal. And believe you me, I'm just some guy, but I used to work in a hospital. There is no shortage of people who can become your client, especially in the United States, or I would imagine other first world countries. You're not going to need to create a dependency, and it would be unethical to do so anyway. But the goal here is that they transition to a point where they don't necessarily need a dietitian, but, I could see people seeing value in becoming your long-term client where they see you a few times a year.
Yes, and that's something we'll definitely highlight in maintenance, where it's not to say that all of a sudden you're like, okay, goodbye. You're in maintenance stage. You don't need me.
Most people have these appointments covered in their insurance anyway.
Yeah, and sometimes it's like a check-in. It's like if you go to like a wellness visit at the doctor, you check in, see how things are going, and sometimes it's just generating some ideas, keeping the engagement, keeping things exciting. Or if you do offer different stuff in your business outside of just, nutrition and counseling, you might see people filter into other areas. So I often have people who nutrition's on point, they're kind of like troubleshooting on their own, and then they filter into the fitness aspect, or they transition into like group stuff versus one-on-one. And so there's totally a lot of opportunity there, where it's not to say that you're just kind of like leaving people and like, okay, you got it.
You're good now. See you never.
Goodbye.
Get out of my life.
Yeah, that's, and some people it is, they came, they got what they needed, and they're like, I'm good, and then.
And what those people do generally after that is they refer their friends and family to you.
Very true.
Because they've had a good experience. And even though they no longer feel they require your services, if anyone else in their life does happen upon a situation where they maybe do need a dietitian, well, they have someone to refer them to. Yeah. Always a good thing.
Yeah. And the other thing too is that, sometimes people, they came to you for one thing and they've, accomplished what they needed to or wanted to. They got what they wanted out of the visits. They're not necessarily looking to schedule more, but then something changes. So if you leave it on like a positive, open note, not forcing them to have more appointments just to have them, they're more likely to want to come back when their health changes, or if something happens, or they're interested in something else. Like I focus a lot on plant-based styles of eating, and sometimes I'll have clients who come back to me for that. And they're like, I know you do a lot of stuff with plant-based, and I'm kind of interested in that. And so they start to explore those areas with me, but because I kind of left the door open. So, keeping the door open is really helpful. And this is actually where it could be helpful to have like an email list. So you're kind of, every once in a while kind of in their inbox.
You're just there, present, available. That's all. And of course, people have different stages of life that they go through. You've been a dietitian for several years, many years at this point, most of your adult life at this point, I guess. Yeah. Weird to think about. You're so old. She turned 30.
I did turn 30.
She's 30 years old now. How about that? But you've been a dietitian for a while now, and you've had clients that had your services and you helped them through a lot of things, and then suddenly they had a major life shift where, now they're pregnant, or they're older and have older person problems, and things like people's lives change, and there are ways in which their diet and lifestyle would have to change to roll with that. And so you get clients back, or you help them through different things. And that's always a way that you'll have longevity with clients. And no one's life stays exactly the same their whole life.
No. Yeah.
Well, anyway, kind of getting into a long-term thing here, just my thought, because it's action and maintenance can kind of be, back and forth depending on what, like, they may be reset into action just by circumstance.
Yeah.
Because you've had clients where, like, I don't know if gestational nutrition is like a thing in the scope of practice for a dietitian, generally speaking.
Yeah, kind of more like the general sense of like gestational diabetes or general pregnancy nutrition. Yes. That's not my area of expertise, so I kind of know like the general aspects, but that's the kind of thing where I would probably refer to.
It's just an example of someone who maybe was in maintenance, but then happens upon a new condition or circumstance in their life where it kind of pushes them back to action.
Yes.
Where they're ready to do things, but they're not sure what to do specifically. It might even push them back to preparation.
Yeah, or like I've had clients where even just between the appointments, something changes, and so they have this, they're like in the action stage, they're putting things into action, and then all of a sudden, like the next session, something like totally throws them for like the rail. So like I've had clients where they have appetite changes, or whether it's related to an illness or actually getting pregnant. And so they're like, I have nausea. Like the idea of meal prepping and planning is like, ugh. And so it's, you take a step back and you reevaluate and you set new goals. And so it's kind of,
Yeah. So
working.
It sounds like preparation, action, and maintenance can all kind of be somewhat fluid themselves.
Yeah.
Typically, you'd like to see someone stay in action, but there may be a life event that creates the need for them to kind of oscillate back to preparation temporarily.
Yeah. And one thing, and it kind of seems obvious now that I've been doing this for a little bit, but I used to think that like this was almost like a failure on my sense, that people kind of relapsed or lapsed, that like I didn't support them enough, I didn't help them enough. And that's not true, and again, as kind of like a newer dietitian, I used to take a lot of that on myself to say like, I didn't do enough, or I didn't set them up for success. And that's just something to keep in mind, is that, people are going to make their own choices, but it's kind of your job to be there and help them. But you can't solve all their problems, and, you're not the one doing the action or the thing. So it's not like a failure on, your part as a dietitian if you see people lapse, because it's naturally that thing's going to occur. So
you can only do so much.
Yeah.
If you can give someone all the tools to be successful, and if they, at the end of the day, if they don't act and there's nothing you can do, I mean, sometimes, you can only do so much as the dietitian.
Yeah. And one thing too is that you shouldn't be working harder than your client.
That's a good phrase. It's a good phrase.
I only recently read that somewhere and I was like, that's a good point.
Well, that's so, another business analogy. It's the 80-20 principle. A lot of times you can find that, a very small minority of your clients are the vast majority of your communication and your time. And it may be within your best interest to drop a client or two if they refuse to or just don't act. And it's a shame. But so you're not only a dietitian if you're in a private practice, you are a business owner. You have to make business decisions. Sometimes dropping a client is part of that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever had to drop a client, but
yeah,
it may come to that.
It may come to that. And sometimes, it sounds drastic, but like sometimes I've not necessarily dropped clients, but kind of brought it to the attention of maybe they're not ready for change. And no matter what I do, they're not ready for change. And
so, you could relentlessly pursue a client that is in fact a dead end.
Yeah.
And you're doing more work than your client at that point, I guess, is what maybe?
And so like that pre-contemplation and the contemplation stages, that's where you can really accidentally get into this phase where you're like doing way more than the client, and you have to take a step back and say, maybe they're just not ready for change. And bringing that up is totally fine to do. And again, leaving the door open, like we talked about before, kind of plant the seed and kind of, in a sense. But sometimes in the action stage, when people have things come up that kind of derail them, like I've had a lot of clients where they've had death in the family, or the holidays came up and they're just kind of like, there's a lot going on, or it needs to be a referral to somebody else, like a therapist. And you're not necessarily dropping them as a client, but you're maybe referring them to somebody else that can help them actively in that moment. And then, maybe they come back to you. And usually people don't necessarily stop working with me, but it's totally okay. And it's, it's even unethical sometimes to not do that in those stages. So that's just something else to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's another skill, is determining what the next step should be for the client. And if it's not working with you, whether it be stopping pursuing a client, whether it be referring them to someone else, or whether they're, ready to transition into that stage where it's like, all right, see you twice a year.
Yeah.
It's up to you as the dietitian, as the expert, as the business owner, to make that decision with your client. I would assume with your client.
Yeah, with your client. And one thing I kind of always ask myself is what's the best thing for them? What's the best thing that I can do for them? And sometimes it's me doing something with them and partnering with them. And sometimes the best thing is to refer them to somebody else. So, taking a step back sometimes is really necessary.
Yeah, I guess you as the dietitian, you don't really run into the circumstance where like, in business, it can be that a very small minority of your clients monopolize your time in terms of customer service, and usually those are the best ones to cut loose.
Yeah.
I guess you don't really have that as a dietitian?
Not necessarily, but you can definitely have some boundary issues, which I think we have a video on that on YouTube.
Probably.
But that's a huge thing too.
We do.
We do. Check that out, because setting boundaries through this TTM stage is really helpful too. And in business as a whole, because if you don't set the boundaries, again, this kind of leads into you like putting all your energy, and you're going to burn yourself out. So
yeah, you really don't want that.
Yeah. But yeah, I've had that too, where you kind of have to set the boundary. And sometimes clients, if they're not okay with that, you do need to kind of say, I think we need to part ways. And, not to say I don't want to see you anymore, but I think there might be a professional that might be better for you. Or I think, we're just not kind of clicking. So maybe,
being tactful seems like it's valuable here.
Yes.
In those instances.
Definitely.
Acting with tact. All right. So with in terms of the action stage, I want to bring it back here. Let's talk about like time frames. So how long? How long in the action stage do you have?
Yeah, so this is kind of really loose, but generally like people tend to be in the action stage for about 6 months, and then they transition into maintenance. Maintenance, usually someone is doing something actionable for 6 months.
Okay, we kind of did talk about that a little bit.
Yeah,
So 6 months of action is healthy.
Yeah.
Could be more, could be less.
Yeah. They could definitely be more, definitely could be less. And that's usually one of the kind of the telltale signs is the confidence level for people and the consistency that they're doing things. So people are doing things consistently. They feel good. They're having success each week. They're troubleshooting on their own when things happen and kind of correcting. That all screams to me that they're moving right into that maintenance stage.
So I guess for action, it's more valuable for you as the dietitian to identify when they're ready to leave the action stage and enter maintenance, rather than like the client may never know that that's how you're thinking about it.
Yeah.
It sounds like this is entirely for you as the dietitian to identify, all right, are they in action or are we moving to the maintenance stage? Because it'll help you cater the way you interact with them.
Yes. Yeah. And honestly, my biggest role in the action stage for a client is like clients is being the support system and like normalizing what's happening, because that's like the biggest thing. I'm their support system. I'm there to bounce their ideas off of, and I'm there to normalize when things don't go as planned and help them to kind of recalibrate. But, it is kind of in a sense for you as the dietitian, because you can identify, once they move into maintenance, then you're not, they're kind of just doing it on their own. They don't necessarily need you. So
yeah, so you can kind of dial back. You're not hovering. You're not over coaching, I guess. Could be a thing.
Yeah, that could definitely be a thing.
All right. Yeah, I think we summed it up here. So do you want to bring it home? This has been preparation in action.
Yeah. So preparation, clients in the I will. So they're preparing, they're getting things, they're planning, they're setting the goals, they're maybe taking small steps, they're gathering resources, and then they move into the action stage, which is the I will, or the I am, sorry. I will to I am.
How dare you?
So when they're in the action stage, they're I am. So I am doing this. I am exercising. I am eating more vegetables. I am tracking my intake, all these things. And during those stages, you are there to help kind of support. You're there as a way to kind of help normalize the experience, tweak goals as they need to, and really help them to kind of celebrate as they're kind of working through that action stage. So,
yeah, I would say that's a good summary. I like this. The more I learn about this stages of change, the more I like it, even as something that applies to everything, not just dietetics.
Yeah.
Preparation, action, maintenance.
Yeah. It's so funny when you mention that now. Like, I just keep thinking about like business as a whole.
Planning and execution.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think there's really like a maintenance. Well, I guess there kind of is in that regard too.
Mm-hmm.
Good stuff to know as the dietitian, but also pretty valuable to know if you're a client. Could be valuable to know this stuff too.
Yeah. And actually, I used to think it wasn't beneficial. People shouldn't know this, but it's actually,
Secret.
I've brought this up with clients, and to be honest, when you talk to them about it, it helps to normalize kind of where they're at. And then it also, depending on where they are in the stages, sometimes learning about this can be helpful for someone, because they can identify, what behaviors that they're experiencing that others have, and how they might, use it to their advantage. So
yeah, helping to normalize, I think, is a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because a lot of people will ask me, they'll say, have you had other clients like this? And like give me a scenario. I'm like, yes. And it's not to belittle their experience. It's just, people go through this, and sometimes finding that support can be really
helpful. A lot of people, and this is human, it's human nature to think that you are the protagonist in a book about you. Mm-hmm. It's human nature. So you don't know that people are going through the same thing you're going through because you're not overtly aware of other people's lives.
Yeah.
Most people are most people are all too similar to you, and they're going through the same thing. So it's, generally speaking, it's pretty normal to go through the things that, in this sort of instance you're going through, which is why this method works so well. And it's kind of an umbrella method for so many things.
Yeah.
That's why it works.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I think we nailed it. What's next?
Yeah. So next is part 3. So we'll talk about maintenance and the termination aspect and kind of what happens in those stages, what you can do as the dietitian, which we kind of highlighted a few things today, but, how this can actually look in terms of a practice and helping people in those stages too. So.
Cool. All right. So that sounds good. Next up will be maintenance, and then I guess a bit on termination.
Yes.
Which sounds super negative, but I'm sure there's a reason why, and we'll talk about it then.
Yes.
All right. That'll do it for us here at My RD Journey. Mm-hmm. Felicia Peraza of PerazaNutrition.com. Check her out on all socials, links in the description: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, MySpace, Friendster, Tumblr. No.
Oh.
What's wrong with Tumblr? How dare you?
Oh, wait, never mind.
She's most active on Instagram and I guess Facebook too.
Yeah, Instagram definitely way more active, and then Facebook, yes.
And your website, PerazaNutrition.com.
Yes.
Where you can find all of her links, services, and more about Felicia there as well. Felicia Peraza, MDA, RDN, LDN, CPT. Possessor of the ACSM Certified Personal Trainer Certificate. Right? I guess. Yeah. I don't know what that means. I'm just reading things off of my page now. That'll do it for us here with My RD Journey. Anything else to close with?
No, I think we covered a lot of really good stuff today. So thanks for listening/watching.
Thanks very much. Until next time, see you then.
Bye.